All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Our Children, Our Schools Forum on the important and urgent need for Governor Murphy to appoint new members to the New Jersey State Board of Education. The New Jersey State Board of Education is one of the most important governing bodies in our state because it is all about our children and what happens in our schools. And so we're going to talk about it today. Recently, Our Children, Our Schools has been laser focused on this issue, wanting to begin to galvanize people to pay attention to the New Jersey State Board of Education, as members of our collaborative have been doing for the last few years, urging Governor Murphy to make some appointments. There are 13 seats that are soon to expire out of the 13 members of the board, and we cannot have an expired State Board of Education working for our children. So Governor Murphy announced some appointments, but now they need to be confirmed. And so tonight's forum is all about understanding the role of the New Jersey State Board of Education in the education of our children, and also this issue. So we have a dynamic panel and we are looking forward to the conversation. But first, we want to share with you a little bit more about Our Children, Our Schools. And my name is Kaleena Berryman. I am the co-convener and very, very excited to talk with our panel, which I will introduce shortly. So first, we will share with you all about Our Children, Our Schools. So Our Children, Our Schools is a statewide network of education, civil rights, and civil rights advocates and organizations throughout New Jersey. The purpose of OCOS is to advocate on behalf of public school children, and just shout out to all of our OCOS members who are with us this evening. OCOS members and friends work together to support a vision of public education that is child-centered and provides all students with excellent and equitable opportunities to learn. This vision includes full and fair funding, partnerships that support families and improve communities, reforms that enable schools and educators to do their job well, and increased accountability and transparency in education policymaking and programs. Now, before we get into the conversation, we want to make sure that everyone understands what the New Jersey State Board of Education does. And so the next slide introduces you to the Board of Ed. But first, the actual next slide is a copy of our campaign letter, which we will tell you more about as we move forward. But the whole purpose of our forum tonight is to galvanize people to really hold Governor Murphy accountable for making sure that those confirmations are made. And so we will share with you the link in the chat to this sign-on letter that we are urging folks to send and to sign, that tells our governor that this is very important to us. But before we get into the campaign, we will tell you a little bit more about the State Board of Education. So the State Board of Education, on the next slide, is a 13-member body, and they're appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the New Jersey State Senate. These members serve without compensation for 6-year terms. By law, at least 3 members of the state board must be women, and no 2 members may be appointed from the same county. Governor Murphy, until September, had not appointed a single member to the New Jersey State Board of Education since taking office. The terms of 11 members of the State Board of Education, including the current president, have expired. Some expired quite some time ago. By June 2023, all 13 members will be serving in expired seats. All right. Now, in September, we'll go to the next 2 slides. These are some of our members of the state board, and the next slide has a few more members. We're going to come back to them. But in September, Governor Murphy announced nominations to the New Jersey State Board of Education. Finally, after years of really encouraging the governor to make some appointments, 3 appointments were made. We'll tell you more about those appointments soon. But now we're in a state of wait, and our children just cannot wait any longer. And so today we're going to talk to 4 dynamic leaders in education in our state about why this is so important and why we need to act. All right. So to introduce our awesome panel, first we have Julie Borst, Executive Director of Save Our Schools New Jersey Community Organizing, and their full bios will be in the chat. Stan Karp, Director of the Secondary Reform Project Education Law Center. Dr. Leah Owens, of Just Writing and former Newark Board of Education member, Arfal Jenkins, parent and executive director of the Newark SEPAC. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening to talk about this issue that has impassioned us for sure. And so, first question, all right, to the four of you. As a parent, teacher, stakeholder, why should I be concerned about the New Jersey State Board of Education? What does it do for our children? What does it do for us? So why is the New Jersey State Board of Education so important? And I'll start with Julie.
Thank you, Kaleena, for having me tonight. As you know, this is something Save Our Schools New Jersey has been trying to get the governor to do for a long time. And so we're really glad to see that he's taken these first steps and nominated these three excellent candidates. I think probably for most people probably don't really even know that the State Board of Education really even exists. Right. And that's not, I mean, and there's nothing good or bad about that. It just sort of is. They very quietly do their work. But they are there for the purpose of approving regulations. So when laws are passed regarding education, the New Jersey Department of Education writes the regulations along with the State Board of Education, and then they approve them. And why this is important and why it's important really for Governor Murphy specifically is that none of the current board members were appointed by him. So he did have an education agenda when he took office. It's much easier for a governor to do their work when they have a friendly board. And I would argue, as I know some of my colleagues would as well, that our current composition is not particularly friendly to public education. And the people that he's chosen to switch out, and I know there's a lot of talk in the background about the health ed standards, but really these are people who are champions of privatization of public schools, and it's time for them to go. And really what we want to see on there is people who are really dedicated to making sure that public education is what it should be for all of our students.
Thank you, Julie. Now, Arfal, you're a parent who is always watching the State Board of Education, so you understand its importance. Share with us from your perspective as an advocate, but also as a parent, why should we be paying attention to the State Board of Ed?
Well, the State Board of Ed is there for parents, for community members to, as an extra layer when they can't get any results. It's for a number of reasons. So it's like Julie said, they're there to approve regulations to be able to implement the laws that are in New Jersey regarding education. But it is an extra layer of advocacy that a parent or community members or groups can go to and have their grievances heard and responded to when they may not get any results with their local board. And so you do get more action, you do get more insight, and you could get a lot of response by doing that. And so we've done that a number of times, and we've had a great experience with it. And knowing that this is our board, this is our state, we pay our taxes, and they're there to serve our needs. And so, with what, the families that I work with, over 6,000 families in Newark Board of Education who are receiving special education services, we end up with a lot of needs. And so where do we go with those needs? We have to go wherever the bodies will hear us and respond. So we don't stop at our local board, we go to the state, we go to the Senate, we go wherever we need to go. And so the State Board is one of those entities.
Excellent. Thank you, Arfal. Dr. Owens, one of your recent projects that I love is your policy watch through Just Writing. I think that was just such a great idea to begin, where you're keeping us updated about what's happening at the state. So for you, why is the State Board of Education important in your role as a community organizer, as an educator, but also, why have you decided to focus us on policy watch and making sure that the community is aware of these conversations that are happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly echo both what Julie and Arfal said. And on the policy perspective, there's a very important relationship between New Jersey State Board of Education and the New Jersey legislature. And so while the New Jersey legislature and those members can propose and pass bills, it is the responsibility of the State Board of Education along with the Department of Education to kind of turn those bills and new laws into policy and regulations. So it's important to pay attention to what both bodies are doing, because we want to make sure that what gets passed as a bill or law is interpreted in a way so that the rules reflect whatever the intent of that bill or law was. So that's a key part of why we need to pay attention to the Board of Education, the State Board of Education. And also, I think we're going to talk a little bit later, but just because there are different policies, or code is the official term on the state level, that have to be readopted. And so we have to pay attention to the conversations that are had when it's time to make revisions to rules, or even if the State Board of Education decides that it wants to attempt to repeal a rule. So a lot of what happens on the district level flows down from the state. And again, the intent and interpretation is important to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And Stan, you have been the person who has kept us all connected to what's happening in the legislature, especially around graduation and the futures of our young people. And so from your perspective, why is this body so important?
Well, I think my co-panelists here have all made, important points about why it's important to pay attention to both the legislature and the state board when it comes to education policy. As you know, before I came to ELC, I was a high school teacher in Patterson for many years. And that's when I first started paying attention to the state board around the issues of testing. Testing is a really important issue for anyone concerned in education. Parents want to know how their students and their kids are doing. Teachers want to make sure that tests are not used to punish schools or to punish themselves. And public officials want to know how schools are doing in their community and how resources are being used. And a lot of that comes down to testing policy. New Jersey has more testing than it's ever had. We have the New Jersey Student Learning Assessments. We have the Start Strong assessments, which students had to take right when school started this year. And we have a new graduation test. And it's the State Board of Education that makes the rules around testing. All the regulations around testing come through the state board. And in some ways, they bear some of the responsibility for the overuse and the misuse of testing that we see in schools today. When Governor Murphy first came on as the governor in his first term, he had made a promise to change testing policy, to kind of reduce the impact that some of these tests had in pushing teaching and learning time and having that be used for testing instead. And yet the state board, because it was a state board that had been appointed by the governor before him, really became an obstacle to changing some of those testing policies. He was blocked in some of the changes he wanted to make, and the state board was adding new layers of testing instead of eliminating them. And I know when we get deeper into the webinar, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more specifically about graduation policy, which the state board has been messing up for a long time, and which poses some special issues that we can change in the next few months. So I'm really glad to, be invited to this forum and to have this discussion tonight.
Yeah, and there's so much that is right now on the table, and that makes it even more important why we need the right people on the Board of Education. And so these 3 nominations are step 1, but the goal is really to have all of those expired seats taken care of ASAP. So let's start with these 3. Now, when I first, I've been familiar with the State Board of Education as an advocate, as an organizer in Newark. However, I did not know anything about these expired seats. And so we want to show a graphic so that those who are with us can understand just how, in a way, outrageous this is. So I'm going to ask Nicole to share that graphic. And so here are the same members that we introduced you all to earlier, but here is a breakdown of the county, some of their first appointments, some of which are back into 1990, 2005, 2004, who appointed them, when they were last confirmed, which was in 2017, and then when their terms expire. So you can see a number of folks expired in 2018 and 2019. 2020, 2021. At this point, every single seat is expired except for two seats. My next question is the question that I had when I learned about this issue in our OCOS task force meeting. Julie, how does this happen? How are so many members able to stay in expired seats?
I think the short answer is, and I don't know if there's any legislators listening in tonight. The short answer is there is no law that says they have to vacate their seat once it expires. And so we have a bit of a history of this in New Jersey. You know, Governor Murphy's not the first governor to have expired seats, and many expired seats actually on his school board. It just happens though that during the previous administration, you know, people wound up vacating the seats after a while. And then, as you can see, he filled a bunch of these seats just as his term was coming to an end. And I also want to make something, you know, really clear here. There are many people who sit on this board, regardless of who initially appointed them, who are absolute champions for public education. And so I personally don't have issue with most of these members. But I do think that as a matter of good governance, it makes sense for not only for a governor to have a friendly board so he can do the work that he set out to do. You know, people voted for him because he was going to, you know, minimize standardized testing. He was going to bring us down to federal minimums. We do way more testing than is federally required. He wanted to get rid of the high school exit exam. And while that's a legislative action, you do need support from your state board of ed in order to make that really happen, right? And to minimize the impact, you know, of what the current statute says. So I think that there are plenty of members who are perfectly fine if you were to renominate them for the seats that they're currently in. I don't see a problem with that. But I think just as a matter of good governance, of making sure that, you know, you're doing your due diligence and your house cleaning, and then also that your board represents the values that you have related to public education and are therefore able to execute your vision for public education. I think that's incredibly important. And we simply have not had that since Governor Murphy took office. So that's really in a nutshell. But those seats are not vacated because they don't have to be. If there was a law saying you had to be, you know, you had 6 months or whatever to get out of there, then it might look different because then we'd have a whole bunch of holes every month, and you might not even be able to reach a quorum by doing that. So I think there are some things that could be done if anybody had the will to do that. But I also really feel like the bottom line here is, unless a governor has a board that is in line with their public education values, you are not going to be able to execute what you had promised the public you would do.
Understood. Now we have a couple more questions to ask our panel, but I want to make sure that for those attending, if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A. They will be sent to me and I will share them with our panel. So if you have any questions, Nicole Chulo, who is a co-leader of Our Children, Our Schools, and Sharon Kringle, another co-leader of Our Children, Our Schools, they are here and they are listening. So if you have any questions, please feel free to share, all right? So now let's get a little deeper into some of those policies, because Our Children, Our Schools, we are an educating body as well. We don't want to just talk about the board without talking about what's happening in the State Board of Education. And so I'm going to give this question first to Dr. Owens. What are some of the issues that the board is currently considering that we should keep a watch on? So what are some of the hot issues right now, Dr. Owens?
Yeah, so there's 2 things that I'd like to highlight. New Jersey Administrative Code Title 6A is what administers education, in particular, Chapter 2, which is about the commissioner. And so under that chapter, what it is mostly consists of is the organization of the department. And that's something to pay attention to, because that really can show the priorities of the State Board of Education in terms of how it's looking for the Department of Education to administer education policy. And I bring that up particularly for a reason, because there's a bill in the legislature right now, S 820 and then A 1984, which is looking to establish, originally the language was a division of school desegregation, and then the Senate made an amendment to the title to be a division of equity and inclusion underneath the Department of Education. And so there's been some movement in the Senate, not so much in the Assembly yet, but that's something important to pay attention to, because historically with the Department of Education, we actually used to have a division against discrimination. And that came about from the 1945 law against discrimination here in the state of New Jersey. And underneath that division, there was a Office of Equal Educational Opportunity. And then underneath that office, there were individual staff members who focused in on racial segregation and discrimination, gender discrimination, ethnic discrimination. So we actually had staff members whose responsibility it was to pay attention to all of these issues. So all of that structure of the department of itself, again, can speak to the priorities of the board, to speak to the priorities, of course, of the governor as well, since the governor appoints all these positions. And then the second one I want to bring up is Title 6A, Chapter 7, managing for equality and equity, managing for education and equity, sorry, equality and equity, I'm mixing it up. But anywho, the equity code, and that's really important. It was first adopted in 2003. It's since gone through 2 readoptions with minor changes, but as it sounds, right, just by the title, managing for equality and equity, it really sets the framework again for examining discrimination that's occurring in schools and making sure that there's some sort of treatment applied so that it's not occurring. And something I just want to read specifically in wrapping up is that underneath the previous administration, Governor Chris Christie, they looked to actually eliminate language that made that code really strong. And then eliminating that language, again, has just kind of made it less effective. And if the State Board of Education does not start talking about this code because it's up for readoption and it has to be put on the agenda within the next couple of months, we may see an expired code turn into a code that no longer exists. And that specific language is that whenever a code is being adopted or being looked to be readopted, the state board has to talk about different sort of impacts that code will have: social impact, impact on jobs, impact on the environment, so on. And in the original language, it said the need for such rules is based in the historical context of racism in the United States that has had an insidious and pervasive effects in the public schools. One such effect is racial segregation of schools, with New Jersey being identified in a national study as having the 4th most segregated schools in the nation. And then there's also language around unconscious bias. And the reason why I wanted to really read that, again, that got eliminated from readoptions. And if we're not paying attention to the way that the State Board of Education is talking about code that they're either adopting for the first time or readopting, then again, we may see codes that are there to protect our children actually get weakened.
Wow, thank you for raising that, Dr. Owens. I didn't know anything about that. And it makes a lot of sense to keep an eye on that, because the New Jersey Supreme Court is currently hearing arguments around desegregation of schools. So thank you for that policy watch. We shall be paying attention to that. Let's see, who would like to go next? Because I know everybody has something to add and I want to be fair. So if I don't see a hand up, then I'm going to go to Stan. Stan, what are some policies? What are some things that are being discussed at the state board that we should pay attention to? Then I'll go to Arfal and then Julie.
One very specific issue that's going to have a lot of impact on our high school students is high school testing. As I told you, New Jersey has a lot of tests. It's also one of only about 11 states that does high school exit testing, which means before a student can get a diploma, they have to pass a test. Most states have eliminated this because it's not a reliable indicator of whether or not a student, especially a given score on any day, is not a reliable indicator of what a student can do or whether a student is ready to move on and be successful in life. There are many more reliable indicators of that, including grade point averages and the courses that students have taken, and teacher recommendations and the whole portfolio of a student's achievements. But New Jersey does exit testing, and last year they rolled out a new exit test called New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Assessment. And one of the things the State Board of Education does is it sets the passing score, the cut score, for whether or not a test, you've passed the test or not. And all cut scores are arbitrary. All cut scores depend on making certain judgments. And the State Board of Education last February set a cut score that ignored the recommendations of the test vendor that created the test, that ignored the recommendations of the Department of Education itself. And being led by Vice President Mulvihill, who was one of the Christie appointees, one of the protesting anti-public education appointees on the state board, led a move to raise the score you needed to pass that test above what had been recommended. And the state has been sitting on the results of this, but the raised score has resulted in passing rates of about 40% on the English language portion of the test, and about 50% on the math portion of the test, which means about 50 to 60,000 seniors in the class of 2023 would be scrambling for graduation right now if the state legislature hadn't stepped in and basically told the state board, after it did this, after it rolled out the test in the middle of the pandemic, after it raised the cut score to a higher level than had been recommended, the state board responded by telling the state, the Department of Education, that you could not use this test this year to determine who graduated, that you had to use this test, this news test, which had never been given. You had to use it as a field test, and you should look at the results of that field test and revisit the cut score. Well, the legislature saved them, but the state board has not revisited the test. It has not looked at the data. It has not publicly reconsidered the cut score, and they need to do that before the spring testing season rolls around again. Because if they don't do that, they're going to get similar results, and the class of 2024, who are the current juniors, are going to have to scramble by taking additional tests and finding ways to graduate when they should be concentrating on making their plans for life after high school. So this is a very concrete example of how you need to have people on the state board who are responsible, who listen to both expert advice and different opinions, and who, when they say they're going to revisit a score, make sure that they go back and revisit, the things that they promised to do. And we still need to, have this campaign, put pressure on them to make sure they do that between now and the spring. It's also a good reason why we should reconsider the legislature could step in and do what they did last year, but do it for everyone. They could eliminate exit testing from New Jersey's testing suites, and they could make sure that students have a more holistic approach to whether or not they graduate. The bills that I just put the numbers in the chat are the bills that would eliminate exit testing. So that would be the best solution to the particular problem I'm talking about. But at a minimum, the state board has to make good on its plan to revisit the cut score and to go back to at least what the recommendation was last year, which would have increased passing rates on the test by 15 to 20%. That's one example of how what the state board does has a very direct, impact on students and families in the state.
Thank you, Stan. And the good thing is that the state board meets monthly, right, Julie? Once a month, 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. And so if these issues are important to you, then you need to be tuned into those meetings. And so at the end of our webinar, we're definitely going to share with you the information that our panelists are providing in the chat, but also ways to get you connected so that the State Board of Education sees that we are paying attention. Ms. Muhammad Jenkins, what should we be paying attention to?
Two things that are current are, one is NJAC 6A15, bilingual education, is up for readopting by February 23rd, which covers related to bilingual education and identifying students who may be multi-language learners and placements of those students in instruction programs that would support their, their learning for English. And it's especially significant to families because if this is not readopted and done effectively, students may not be afforded the rights they have now and being provided FAPE in their native language, along with accessing English as a second language in public schools. Another rule up for readopting is NJAC 6A28, which is the School Ethics Commission, which sets forth, just like Leah was sharing, rules for acceptable behavior, actions, and affiliations for board members across the state. So those are the two that I found that were current to pay attention to. The other ones are like, I don't know how current they are, but I know they're very relevant, which are the equity to segregation, safe schools, which is particularly important for BIPOC families because when one group says safe, they're thinking of police officers, and another group is getting abused and and it gets tragic. And so that's a very difficult topic, and that's something that we need to discuss more and with the state board. So those are, and the sex ed.
Oh yeah.
That's the issue because parents are just becoming aware, and if you have young children, sometimes you're learning what's being done and what's being taught. Sometimes it's, you're wondering, is this age appropriate? Is this harmful? I don't want to say what's right or wrong, but you do want to retain your rights to rear your child and have them, attend public school without, undue influence,
right.
things that are just, outlandish.
Yeah, and I'm glad that our panel is introducing these issues because sometimes even advocates can think that these decisions are made locally or they're made at the USDOE and not understanding that the State Board of Ed is really holding a lot of this in their hands. So Ms. Borst, what would you add? Because you are an honorary member.
Yeah.
People
Oh,
accountable.
no, I'm definitely not. So I just want to just kind of tag on to Arfal here just for a second, and just for any parents who are out there who are concerned about the new sex ed standards, and there really have not been that many changes to them. I would say two things. Number one is, and you hear an awful lot of things too around quote unquote parent rights, parental rights, and things like that. So, and a lot of people implying that you don't have rights as a parent, and you absolutely do. This has been my personal frustration listening to all of this stuff unfold both nationally and here in the state, as parents do have quite a lot of rights. And one which is really important that was codified in New Jersey in 1980, and that is, as a parent, if you are uncomfortable with what's going to be taught in sex ed class in whatever grade your child is in, you absolutely have the right to opt them out of that classroom experience. So I just want to make that really clear. The other thing I want to say about this just generally is, if you have questions about what's happening inside your child's classroom, the teachers are there to talk. You can talk to your teachers, you can talk to building principals, and you can talk to superintendents, and they are not going to be put out or feel like they're putting them under a microscope if you're asking a question at all. I mean, everybody's there for the good of the students. So I just want to say that, because I see an awful lot of misinformation about what parents can and can't do, and it's kind of frustrating. So I want to tag on to what Stan was talking about. And I want to thank Arfal and Leah for being very specific, in the policy discussions that are happening now. And if you've been watching the last couple of months, the word equity has come up. And there seems to be a lot of confusion among some board members about what the word equity actually means, and that's highly problematic for many reasons. So I will just say that, and let the public know too that you should be able to view, the state board has only been meeting virtually now for ever since the beginning of COVID. They have not gone back in person, so it's very easy to access watching a State Board of Ed meeting, which happens at 10 o'clock the first Wednesday of every month generally. But I want to tack on to what Sam was talking about the high school exit exam. So not only does the State Board of Education set the cut scores for that graduation test, they have also set a series of benchmarks that every student has to meet. And then the test is something that's on top of all of that. So students are required to have a certain number of credits to graduate. There's a bare minimum that the state has. Locally, in some places, that number is higher than what the state sets. That's entirely up to your local school board, but there is a minimum. There are certain courses that every single student in New Jersey has to take, including special education students. They may be modified classes, but they still have to have those classes in order to graduate. You have to have a passing GPA.
Right.
And that's really important, right? So we know, as researchers can tell you, education researchers can tell you that grades are really important. That's a much better indicator of what a student has learned than some arbitrary tests that somebody has to take, right? And then the last thing is you have to have seat time. You had to have shown up. You can't have been absent for half of your high school experience and expect to graduate. So these bare minimums already exist. And I would argue that those minimums certainly are enough to graduate high school. And we also know, nationally, our incarceration numbers look like, nearly 50% of people who are incarcerated don't have a high school diploma. This is really basic for being able to move into your adult life, and it's arbitrary. And states who have more recently gotten rid of their high school exit exam, California probably being the poster child for this, they actually went back and retroactively gave the high school diplomas to people who didn't pass their test, but they met all those other similar type criteria that New Jersey has. It is incredibly important, especially as the mom of a disabled student who is now a young adult. That high school diploma is incredibly important. You cannot operate as an adult in this country without that as the bare minimum. And so why are we gatekeeping that? And I know the argument will be, well, how do we know how kids are doing or whatever? Well, because
Give
how
us the list.
go look at that list, number one. And number two, we will remind you again that New Jersey does more testing than any other state in the country. And our tests are the longest tests, even though we've just made them shorter.
Right.
We do an incredible amount of testing. We know very well how these kids are doing, right? So it's an extra added thing. But this State Board of Ed has decided that these are the bare minimums for all these other things. Those are really good indicators of how students are doing. And we need to listen to that.
So you all have introduced quite a number of issues around equity, desegregation, exit exams, rights of students and parents, benchmarks, graduation requirements. Okay, we have all of that. Now let's talk about the nominations that have been made and nominations to come, because we are not satisfied, right? We're happy that 3 nominations have been made. We're just going to tell the viewing audience that that does not mean that movement has been made. So the nominations have been made, but those folks need to be confirmed. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to take questions from the audience. But first, let's talk about the 3 candidates. So I'm going to ask Nicole to share the slide, and we're just going to introduce to you all, who are these 3 people we keep saying were nominated? So we have 3 candidates. All right, first we have Mary Bennett. Now, I'm not going to read everything. You all we will share this information with you, but Mary Bennett has served as an educational consultant for Seton Hall University Academy for Urban Transformation since 2017. She's a university instructor and education mentor at Montclair State University, where she designs curricula for pre-service teachers progressing from learning theory to fieldwork. She also led Project Grad as executive director from 2001 through 2013, and was a high school principal, program director for the Newark Board of Education, high school principal, and English language arts teacher. So a long career in education, from educator all the way up to school principal, and a transformative leader for sure. Next, Dr. Kwang-Hee Jung. Dr. Kwang-Hee Jung is the Associate Director for Data Management and Statistics at the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University, a role she has held since 2011. She has been an assistant research professor since 2004. Dr. Jung leads the data management and statistics team at NIEER and has designed and conducted large-scale quasi-experimental designs focusing on early education and childcare policy issues. And next of the nominees, we have Dr. Claudine Keenan. Dr. Claudine Keenan has served as the Dean of Education for Stockton University for over 10 years, where she has overseen bachelor's, master's, and doctoral programs for more than 1,000 students. Previously, she was the Director of Academic Programs for Marlborough College Graduate School in Brattleboro, Vermont, where she designed and directed programs in leading and teaching with internet technologies. And she also worked as Chief Planning and Budget Officer for Stockton University, where she was responsible for supervision of institutional research. All right, so 3 powerhouse women. We have 3 candidates. So I'm going to ask our panel, what kind of characteristics should we be looking for in a New Jersey State Board of Education that is going to advance the mission and advance the vision? I'm going to start with Ms. Muhammad Jenkins. What should we be looking for in our candidates to know that they're good choices?
Well, my first thought is the clear absence of a clear conflict of interest, i.e. business ties to any corporations or entities wherein a decision-making board member could stand to enrich themselves based on contracts or agreements within New Jersey school districts. Also, an understanding of IDEA and the US and New Jersey constitutions, as well, because it's extremely frustrating to share your remarks with the board members for their, insight and influence, and they don't have the foggiest idea of the basis or the laws germane to the issues at hand. Absolutely. That is very frustrating.
Yes, absolutely.
2 things that are, really, I think that really important qualities that a board member should have. Obviously, expertise in certain areas, but those 2, because I have ran into that where they're not really familiar with IDEA, and I'm like, whoa, how's this happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that has happened across a lot of different issue areas where, folks just were not familiar. Leah, what should we be looking for?
This probably goes without being said, but I'll still say it since this is being recorded. So individuals who are going to put children at the center, right? They're going to take care of children, make decisions that are in the best interest of children to make sure that they're healthy, that they're learning. That is certainly most important. That has to be the priority for any individual who's appointed to the State Board of Education. I'd also say, as being a former school board member in Newark, there's a parallel relationship and responsibility as a State Board of Education. You don't necessarily come in knowing all of the steps of the process, but it needs to be these need to be individuals who are willing to learn, who are going to take the time, who are going to pay attention, who are going to be clear about issues that they champion, though we want them to pay attention to everything for sure. But we also want individuals who are going to be critical thinkers. Just because there are rules and guidelines and policies does not mean that they are the best rules or guidelines or policies that could be set, right? So we need individuals who are going to think about what's actually on the books, and again, make sure that whatever's on the books is centering children.
Excellent. We have a comment that we wanted to share from our audience. New Jersey State Board of Education must set a policy to provide access for working parents and community residents to attend state board meetings, evening sessions, or weekends. So that's something that they're looking for. Someone who's going to prioritize public participation. Julie.
That would be great.
Yeah. Do you mind, could I just add something just real quick? Sorry, Julie, because I had made a note and we had talked about the board meetings, and I just want to double check. So even from this month, the board meetings already occurred. So the State Board of Education continues to meet virtually, and you cannot give live public testimony. So as an individual, I think all of us on this call at one point or another have given public testimony at a board meeting, and we know the difference between being on WebEx or Zoom or whatever the case and actually being in the room and feeling someone's passion, feeling tension, feeling, whatever the case may be. And it's always nice, to have a protest and people outside, making some noise too. So the fact that they continue to meet virtually and you cannot give live testimony, only written testimony, I find highly problematic. It's something that needs to be changed as soon as possible, especially since children are back in schools, teachers and other education workers are back in school. So that's a big question for me. How come the State Board of Education is not meeting in public?
Yep.
That's a good
In
one.
person.
Yep, that.
Rosella from our task force has definitely, Rosella, shout out to Rosella. She has definitely pushed that issue in our task force meetings. Julie?
Yeah, absolutely. And so having those meetings virtual has kind of been a double-edged sword, right? So on the one hand, many more people are able to watch, but there's no participation. And that lack of participation is certainly a problem. Although as somebody who has provided testimony for many, 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 many years in front of that board, I'd say probably 99% of the time they weren't actually listening to what we were saying. So it's kind of, I know it's a tough thing to sit there for hours and hours and hours and to listen to everybody's everybody's perspective on whatever the topic of the day is, or when it's an open topic, it can be on anything. But I also think that, to have our State Board of Education representing all of us, they really have to be open-minded enough and understanding and empathetic enough to see what's happening. And when people take the time, many people take off work to come and provide testimony. They need to be respectful of that, right? We need people who are sitting in those chairs who really want to be there for all the right reasons. And the right reason is that we want, we all want these people to be hyper-focused on how their decisions are impacting our kids in schools. So that's really, really, really important. To answer the original question to this, though, I think right now, one of the things that I've been looking for nominees for these seats are people who can represent a really diverse population in this state. And the current composition doesn't really quite get us there. And so when you have counties like Essex that are not represented, that has one of our largest cities in it, not having a seat at the table is definitely a problem. And as a Bergen County resident, I will say, if I have a problem with Bergen County not having representation when we have nearly 1 million people in Bergen County, and we have not had representation on the board for a very long time. So I'm very happy from that perspective, just with two of those members. So I'm very glad to see that. But I think, Arfal and Leah said it perfectly. Like, we want people who know something about education. They don't necessarily have to know the process yet. They're willing to learn. They're willing to digest what they hear. And they're willing to be fair. And I will tell you, having watched the board for many, many years, there are many days where I walk away shaking my head, like, why are these people even here? You're asking some of the most basic questions about how the board functions, but you've been sitting on this board for years and years and years and years. Like, really? Like, what have you been doing all this time? So I think we could get there. I think these 3 candidates are really strong. So hopefully we won't run into senatorial courtesy, which is something that many people don't know about either. So where these people live, their local senator gets to give the nod and say, yeah, like, this is good. So I'm hoping they're in touch with these candidates and learning about them and seeing just about their depth of knowledge about public education and how important that is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. Stan, earlier you outlined some qualifications of a State Board of Ed member. Is there anything you want to add?
I think people have made good points. I mean, in some states, the members of the state board are actually elected, and that can be problematic, but it also means a level of public engagement that we don't have. And one of the things I think we should be looking for in state board members is some experience with public education. We sometimes had people coming from a private education background that is not really representative of what the public policy has to deal with. And we should have some people who have at least some experience in dealing with the public, because the state board should really be a conduit between the Department of Education and the commissioner and the public. And so far, they're not functioning that way. They're functioning too much in a bubble, and they need to have more interaction. You know, maybe even term limits. I mean, the idea that somebody could be on the board for 30 years just doesn't make sense, just in terms of the variety of voices that we should have. So maybe, you know, 4 years, 8 years. I mean, people are giving good service. This is not a reflection on them, but we need more public input into the public governance process around public education.
Excellent, thank you. And I have one more question before we get to the stream of panel of audience questions that have come in. So we're going to transition now into, you know, we've developed a deeper understanding about this issue, about the barriers that have existed, not just to ensuring that there's justice in our schools, but also ensuring that we have a board that works for our young people. But we're at a turning point. We have 13 seats that are expiring, which means that we could have 13 new board members, or maybe not, but at least some new board members who are thinking the way that we need for them to be thinking. And so we want to share the slide one more time. I was supposed to prompt Nicole, I'm sorry, but we want to share our PowerPoint one more time. And the question, and I'm throwing certain questions to Julie first, because in addition to representing Save Our Schools New Jersey, she also is a member of the Our Children, Our Schools task force who helped us to develop this campaign. Just want to send some thank you to the Our Children, Our Schools task force that meets weekly and has helped us to develop this and bring light to this issue. We are asking folks to sign on to this letter that is going to go to Governor Murphy. We've already sent a letter. We encourage you to do the same thing and say, hey, we're glad that you've made these appointments. We support these 3 candidates, but you know that that is not enough. The road is not at the end. We need you to make sure that the Senate actually confirms, the Senate Judiciary Committee actually confirms these nominees, and that it doesn't take months and months and months and months, because we have more seats to fill. And I think that there are other advocacy issues that have come up in our conversation as well that we want to pay attention to, such as term limits and senatorial courtesy and all of those things. But right now, we need those 3 seats confirmed. And so here's a QR code if you'd like to sign on now. We're also going to share a link in the chat for you to sign on. Let's get this letter going out into the community so that we can tell the state of New Jersey that we are paying attention to this topic. We are paying attention and we are holding you accountable to what needs to be done. So my final question is to get a little bit deeper into what needs to be done next. Now that the appointments have been made, in addition to us petitioning, signing this letter, presenting it to the governor, we have 2,000 signatures from across the state of people that are paying attention. What needs to be done to ensure that nominees are confirmed? So what can we do? I'm going to start with Julie. What do we need to do? In addition to writing?
So most basically, the Senate Judiciary Committee is the one who confirms, you know, these nominations. And so obviously there needs to be a Senate Judiciary hearing. And in the past, at least during the last set of nominations, that particular committee didn't even invite these people to come in and speak publicly. They discussed them and then they voted on them. They didn't even have to be there. I would argue that in the name of good governance and in the name of transparency, that candidates should go before that committee and that the committee should have an opportunity to ask them questions. People can certainly provide testimony on behalf of any or all of these candidates if they choose to, either by showing up that day to deliver testimony or to deliver testimony to the committee in writing, which you can certainly do. I would encourage people to get a hold of Senator Stack, who is the current chair. The vice chair is Senator Poe, both lovely people, easy to get in contact with, and also the Senate President, Senator Scutari, because ultimately he's the one who signs off on all of that. So I think those are some ways that people can get involved. You can certainly get a hold of your own senator and say, hey, this is really important to me. Make sure they're paying attention, whether they're on education committees or not. Education is certainly part of their constituency. And those kids are certainly under their watch as well. It certainly can't help to have that conversation so that people know that, you know, as a constituent, you are paying attention to this and how important it is. Those are really basic things. Every single legislator has an office. They're very easy to get in contact with. It's not scary, I promise. Yeah, but really those are really the next step. And I would hope, frankly, that the governor and his staff are prepared to do a little bit of advocacy on behalf of these nominees as well. I think that's really important also. And I hope that, and obviously I hope that all three are confirmed.
Absolutely. Anything else from our panelists that you would like to add of what we need to do to ensure these confirmations are made? Anything else? All right, well, let's get into these audience questions. So, all right, and I think this kind of came up earlier. And whoever, if you want to take it on, just raise your hand. How can we ensure the New Jersey State Board of Education reflects the diverse student populations within the state of New Jersey? So how can we ensure that it's reflective? Anyone want to take that on? Dr. Owens, yes, Leah.
Well, something I would say is along the lines of the OCOS petition you just had up, people from the community can create a grassroots campaign for a nominee that you think would be a great contribution to the Board of Education. I mean, it also means, you know, understanding the rules and how it works and how there's supposed to be representation from different counties, right? So you have to do a little bit of homework in that, but still, there's an opportunity there to advocate for someone who you think would be a great contribution and allow more diversity.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, in the interest of time, we'll move to the next question. Why has Murphy taken so long on this?
That's a good question.
Everybody feels like, what is going on here? Why did it take so long?
That's a great question. We have no insight on that. We're just happy that currently there's nominees and there's something to work for, right? You know, we've obviously known that there's been an issue with expired seats for quite a long time, right? And we've not been quiet about it, but we're glad that these nominees have been put forward. And I think, you know, he's made some really, really good choices, you know, in the people that he's chosen just because of their backgrounds. And I think, you know, super important that somebody from Essex County is representing there. I think that's incredibly important. So I'm really, really happy to see Mary Bennett on that list.
Oh yeah, Arfal, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. Like, why? Well, he's been inactive on a number of things. So let's be clear.
Right.
Equity and the segregation, number one. So, and let me stop that. But Christie has about 8 people there, so he needs to connect with him and get a page out of his book.
How you get it done, right? Yes, absolutely. Stan, you wanted to add?
I was just going to add that there's a backroom character to the maneuvers around appointments. It was probably worse when Sweeney was the Senate president. You know, we would hear things about issues being traded as parts of deals, and this issue getting less attention and other issues getting more attention. So the kind of public campaign that you know, Kaleena, you're leading with OCOS, and that the work that you're doing tonight and the work that you're doing around this campaign around making public aware of it is just really, really key. And if we run into senatorial courtesy blocking some of this, you know, that can just be allowed to happen without a response. So, you know, we need to focus attention on it. The more people are involved, the more the process will be more transparent.
Mm-hmm. And I think this forum has been effective because people are fired up. Someone says, does any of the New Jersey Board of Education members realize that we are still navigating through a global collective traumatic experience? Why do they not understand what our students, staff, and families are still going through? And I think that's in response to the issues that you all have brought up that are before the State Board of Education. Why do they not understand? Like, we're still in a pandemic.
speaks to the lack of diversity that we were talking about. You know, if there was more diversity on that board, they would have a closer connection to what the people are experiencing.
Right, absolutely. And a great example of that is the raise in the cut score. You know, we're in a pandemic. Young people have been disconnected from school buildings. We're struggling. How can you simultaneously talk about learning loss and strategies to address learning loss and then raise exit exam test cut scores?
Oh, and mental health too. So let's not forget too, right? So there is so much conversation around social emotional learning and mental health and all of those things, and yet we're going to judge you by a single test score. What does that say? Right. And a test score that tells you that you're not ready to graduate high school. What? Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
It's interesting that I'm sorry, please. I just gonna say that the legislation that actually responded to the state board's act on the cut score by making it a field test was framed by saying that the conditions in the pandemic and the mental health crisis among youth required a suspension of these kind of test-based exit testing, you know, focus. And that bill passed 73-1 in the Assembly and 40-0 in the Senate. So we have to, you know, we have to build on that kind of awareness and apply it to more than just the class of 2023 last year.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. And Assemblyman Caputo, you know, he was so swift responding to that raised cut score. So, and I just want to make a shout out to him because he's been a real champion, you know, around testing in particular, but education in general.
Awesome. And so I'm going to ask, I'm just going to give a round of applause and show some love for our panel. I'm going to ask them to just prepare mentally a closing thought to get us activated and to move us forward, because this is also our campaign launch to make sure that we're bringing attention to this need. So I'm going to ask you guys to think about a closing remark, but in the meantime, I'm going to do the homework of inviting people to join Our Children, Our Schools. So yes, we want you to sign this petition, but Our Children, Our Schools is made up of many organizations, including Newark SEPAC, including Save Our Schools New Jersey. And it's just a great group to be a part of and to get connected to. And so we invite you to join Our Children, Our Schools. You can visit our website, www.ourchildrenOurschools.org, fill out the Contact Us form, and one of us will contact you and we will get you into the movement that we are starting. Also, please sign the petition and share it. Share it with your network, share it far and wide. Make sure that others are signing it too, so that we can let Governor Phil Murphy know that we are paying attention to this and we've elected him to do a job that he needs to do. All right, so the petition is one thing we want you to share. We need thousands of signatures, so let's get to work. And also we invite you to join Our Children, Our Schools. And we thank you all for joining us. For closing thoughts to everyone, I'm going to go Stan, Leah, Arfal, Julie, and then we're going to wish everyone a good night. So Stan, closing thoughts.
Well, my closing thoughts are thank you to OCOS for doing this, and that testing is not teaching. 2/3 of the states that had exit testing have eliminated it. New Jersey needs to do the same.
Thank you very much. Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. Also want to say thank you to OCOS and you, Kaleena, for having me here on the panel, and to the other panelists as well, and the folks in the chat. And my closing word would be to add your voice to the narrative. So we have individuals who have been appointed to positions and roles. That doesn't mean that it's only their voice that needs to be heard, that they're the only ones shaping what education looks like in this state. There are opportunities, signing the petition, being members of organizations, submitting testimony at State Board of Education meetings, on the local level, whatever the case may be. But it's important that we shift these narratives so that we're not preserving the power structure that currently exists. And I would definitely like to see a narrative that's not just talking about equity, but actually talking about anti-racism.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Owens. Ms. Muhammad Jenkins.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, OCOS, for starting this work and spearheading it. I'm really happy to be a part. And I'm so glad that Leah said the word anti-racist, because we have to lead with anti-racist mindset and hearts. And so I want to speak directly to parents and anyone who is concerned. Reach out to your senator. It's not a big deal. Every phone call that is made to a legislator logged. So you can get yourself, you can make your call, you can get hour, it becomes a hot issue and they have to provide a response to it. That is a very easy thing. We can get the letter from the OCS petition and you can read that off, or you can just kind of paraphrase that this is very important, state board, members being updated, and that they will have to apply some attention to it. And so parents, we don't have much time to do various things, but we can pick up the phone and we could have 3 of our friends do the same thing. No big deal.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Old school organizing, right?
Right.
Those
Absolutely.
tactics work. And Ms. Borst.
So I'm just going to tack on to what Arfal has just said and just say it really is not difficult to communicate with your local legislator. And if you're not sure who that is, you can go to the New Jersey legislature, just Google New Jersey legislature, and that will come up and you can plug in your zip code and it'll tell you who your representatives are and how to get a hold of them. If you are nervous talking on the phone to somebody for the first time, call after hours and leave a message. They all have voicemail. You can do it there. So it's not that hard. And most of them are pretty good about getting back to you pretty quickly. So I think that says a lot for our legislature, is that most people are well engaged. And so I saw that somebody had put in the chat somewhere, and I just would like to address that, asking about having board meetings on weekends or evenings or things like that. So one of our former State Board of Education members actually used to do that. And he would bring not the whole board, but members of the board out into the field just to have listening sessions. And I think we're probably at the point where it would be great, if our current president, Kathy Goldenberg, who I know does a great job of getting out there when she's invited places, make those invitations to her. Organizations invite her all the time and she does show up. So if you think you want her to come in, then I would definitely get a hold. You can do that. You can go to the New Jersey Department of Education's website and just look for the New Jersey School Board on there. And there's a generic email. You can send it to the person who sort of manages all of their correspondence, and you can put in that request. But I agree, having those times where people can access, I think access is incredibly important. This is how you get people involved. This is how they stay involved. And this is how the board is really the only way they know, or where you can really tell where they can get in and see what it is that's happening in your communities. And this is the way to do that. So I would definitely do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone who's attending, we're going to send you the link to the petition. You can sign it. Now we're going to put that as our last slide back up. Make sure that you sign it. Make sure that you share it. We invite you to join Our Children, Our Schools. You can join as a person or as an organization, but also we want you to continue to stay informed. So we will send you information about how you can get involved with Julie Borst and Save Our Schools New Jersey Community Organizing, also with Stan Karp and the Secondary Reform Project of the Education Law Center, Dr. Leah Owens, and Just Writing, but also the Radical Pedagogy Institute, Arfal Jenkins, and the Newark Special Education Parent Advisory Council. We're going to make sure that you get connected because some of the issues that they're working on are also important to you. And Julie is also over the New Jersey Community Schools. Say it correctly for me, Julie, please.
The New Jersey Community, I head up the New Jersey Community Schools Coalition.
The New Jersey Community Schools Coalition, which is doing very important work. So if you're interested in secondary education reform, if you're interested in teaching and radical teaching and justice, if you're interested in special education, and if you are interested in community schools, we will make sure that we get you closer and closer connected. But all of that you can get closer connected to as a part of Our Children, Our Schools. Thank you so much for joining us. Najla Fareed said this was a great panel, very informative. Thank you, Ms. Fareed, for being with us. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Let's keep the fight. power to the people, and power to the petition. All right, let's get it done. Thank you all, and have a really,
Thank
really
you, Kaleena.
good night. You're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Good night,
night.
everyone.
Thank you for
Take
joining
care.
us on Monday. Bye-bye. Thank you all.